What would you do if the world watched you being humiliated and the person you loved most had the power to destroy everyone responsible? Would you want revenge or redemption? On a quiet flight from London to New York, Dr. Naomi Carter, a respected black CEO, was treated like she didn't belong. A spilled Coke, a smirk, a silence that cut deeper than the insult itself. Hours later, her billionaire husband, Marcus Holt, made a choice that would shake the nation. He fired the entire airline crew. Overnight, he became a hero. But beneath the applause, something darker began to unravel. If it were you, would justice still feel right when it comes at the cost of someone else's life? What happens when power, love, and morality collide at 30,000 feet in the air? This is not just a story about racism or revenge. It's a story about what we become when we mistake power for righteousness. So stay with us. Let your heart decide what's fair. And before we begin, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss stories that challenge what you think you know about justice. The hum inside the first-class cabin was soft and steady, like a lullaby wrapped in money. Dr. Naomi Carter sat by the window, 30,000 feet above the Atlantic, watching streaks of cloud drift across a bruised blue sky. For her, flights were the only time she could be still. No phone calls, no board meetings, no endless questions from investors who thought they knew medicine better than she did. At 41, Naomi had earned the right to silence. She was the CEO of Neuropulse, a health tech company that built neural sensors to help stroke survivors speak again. Her days were long, her decisions heavy, but up here, she could simply be another traveler heading home. She adjusted the soft gray blanket over her lap, tucked her curls behind one ear, and closed her eyes. A few rows ahead, laughter cracked the calm. It was sharp, intrusive, the kind that belonged in a college bar, not on a transatlantic flight. Naomi opened one eye. Two young men sat across the aisle, both white, mid-20s, the kind of wealth that came pre-installed. Connor Lane, the louder one, wore a designer hoodie and a gold watch thick as armor. His friend Blake Harlan, equally polished, was already drunk enough to forget volume control. "Bro," Connor said, raising his glass of whiskey, "can you believe they'll let just anyone in first class these days?" Blake laughed too hard. "Guess diversity's working out." "Huh." Naomi's stomach tightened. She'd heard worse, much worse. But the casualness of it, the way they said it, like ordering another drink, was the part that always stung. She looked toward the lead flight attendant, Lydia Price. The woman was in her mid-50s, blonde hair pulled into a perfect bun, her smile polite but weary. Lydia glanced toward the men, then toward Naomi, and for a moment, Naomi thought she'd say something. She didn't. She just offered a practiced grin, the kind that said, "I'm too tired to fix this today." Naomi turned back to her tablet. Her hands were steady, her heart wasn't. An hour later. The turbulence started light at first, like a tap on the shoulder. The captain's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, please fasten your seatbelts." Most passengers obeyed. Connor and Blake did not. They unbuckled, laughing, moving around to trade seats. Connor stumbled, a glass of Coke and ice in his hand. Naomi saw the whole thing in slow motion, the grin, the lean, the flicker of intent in his eyes before the drink flew from his hand. The Coke hit her face in a cold, sticky wave. Her blouse clung to her skin. Ice slid down her collar. For a second, everything went silent except the soft clatter of cubes on the floor. "Oh my God," Connor said, voice slurred with mock concern. Turbulence. Right, Blake burst out laughing. Man, that's crazy. Naomi didn't move. She just stared at him, her face calm, expression unreadable. But her silence was louder than any scream. She turned slowly toward Lydia, who was hurrying down the aisle, napkins in hand. "Oh, dear, what an unfortunate accident," Lydia said quickly, pressing paper towels against Naomi's shoulder. "The turbulence can be tricky." Naomi's voice was quiet, but sharp enough to cut through the cabin's hum. "It wasn't an accident," she said. "Ma'am," Lydia replied, lowering her voice as though Naomi were a problem to contain. "Please don't make a scene." Naomi blinked, feeling a surge of disbelief. "He threw it on me. And you're calling it turbulence, ma'am. Everyone's upset. Let's calm down." Lydia's tone was sweetened control, the corporate voice of self-preservation. She turned to Connor, who was still smirking. "You need to be more careful, sir." That word careful was too small for what had just happened. Naomi took a slow breath. Her pulse beat in her ears, her hands sticky, her dignity dripping onto the cabin carpet. The humiliation was a familiar burn, one she'd learned to hide since the first time a patient's father refused to shake her hand because he didn't expect the CEO to be black. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small cloth, dabbing her face. Her movements were deliberate, restrained. Every muscle in her body screamed for her to stand, to shout, but she didn't. That wasn't her way. When Lydia leaned close again, Naomi met her eyes. "Your name is Lydia Price," she said evenly. "I want this incident documented. I want the pilot's name and theirs." "Ma'am," Lydia said, lips tightening, "you're being unreasonable. If you can't remain calm, I'll have security meet you when we land." Naomi's laugh was low and tired. "Security for me?" She sat back in her seat, stared out the window, and watched the endless blue. She didn't say another word. She didn't look at Connor or Blake. They had already vanished from her reality. She picked up her phone, switched on the expensive Wi-Fi connection, and typed a message to one person. "Marcus. They threw coke on me. Crew covered for them. Flight 247. Landing JFK. I'm okay but furious." It took less than 10 seconds for the reply to appear. "Marcus, I'm coming." That was all. 2 words, but they made the air feel heavier. Naomi turned her phone face down, closed her eyes, and exhaled slowly. She knew what those words meant. Marcus Holt didn't come quietly. He was the kind of man who turned consequences into headlines. Outside, clouds rolled like gray marble. Inside, the cabin settled back into silence. Naomi sat still, her heart steady, but her mind burning. She whispered to herself, almost inaudible, "They think I'll shrink. Let's see who really will." As the engines hummed and the light dimmed, she wrapped the blanket tighter around her shoulders. She didn't know it yet, but this was the last moment of peace she would have for a very long time. Because love, when fueled by fury, can be the most dangerous turbulence of all. The city lights of New York glittered like a constellation below. But to Marcus Holt, the night looked empty. His phone vibrated on the leather seat of his black Escalade, the soft glow of Naomi's message filling the dark interior. "They threw coke on me. Crew covered for them." He read it twice, then a third time. His pulse began to hammer against his ribs, steady and merciless. Marcus had been angry before on the football field, in the boardroom, at the idea that anyone could touch what was his. But this wasn't ordinary anger. This was something old, deep, and familiar, the kind that came from generations of humiliation you thought you had outgrown. He could almost hear Naomi's voice in that text. calm, measured, trying to downplay the pain so he wouldn't explode. But he knew her too well. Naomi only said I'm okay when she was anything but... He dialed her immediately. The call didn't go through. The plane was still mid-air. He stared at the phone, the seconds dragging into minutes. Then, without thinking, he tapped a number on his private contact list. "Elliot," he said, when his head of security answered. "I want the manifest for Flight 247. The crew, the passengers, everyone. Get me everything you can find in the next 20 minutes. "Understood," Elliot replied, his voice quiet but alert. Marcus leaned back, eyes closed, jaw clenched. His reflection stared back from the tinted window-sharp suit. Steady gaze. A man who built empires out of nothing. He'd been broke once, sleeping in a truck behind the gym where he trained. Back then, rage had kept him alive. Now, rage built skyscrapers. He thought of Naomi, her quiet dignity, the way she softened rooms just by existing. He pictured her sitting in that cramped seat, drenched in soda while strangers laughed. Something inside him broke. He checked the flight tracker on his phone. Arrival JFK. 1 hour and 14 minutes. That was all the time he needed. He called his assistant next. "Find the CEO of North Star Air," he said. "Wake him if you have to. Tell him Marcus Holt needs to talk." "Sir, it's almost midnight." I said, "Wake him." The line went dead. By the time the Escalade slid through the security gate at JFK's private terminal, Marcus's team had already assembled. Elliot handed him a tablet. 2 passengers in first-class Connor Lane and Blake Harlan, both sons of major donors. The lead flight attendant is Lydia Price, 28 years with the company. The rest of the crew, standard rotation. Marcus scrolled through photos, the names etching themselves into memory. "Where's the airline CEO on his way?" Elliot said. "He doesn't know why yet." Marcus adjusted his cufflinks. "He'll find out." He paced near the tarmac, wind slicing through the night. In the distance, the silver body of Flight 247 cut through the clouds, descending toward the runway. Naomi was up there, alone, humiliated, probably holding herself together with the same grace that made people think she couldn't break. But he knew better. Grace was armor, and tonight it had cracked. The CEO of North Star arrived 15 minutes later, tie askew, confusion on his face. "Mr. Holt," he said, breathless. "What's this about?" Marcus didn't look at him. "You're about to have a problem," he said. "And so am I. Fortunately for you, I'm a man who fixes problems." The CEO blinked. "I don't understand." "You will," Marcus replied, eyes on the descending plane. "In 60 seconds. The wheels touched the runway with a soft screech. The engines roared, then quieted. The plane taxied toward the gate, the air thick with anticipation. Marcus's chest rose and fell slowly. When the door finally opened, the first passengers began to exit: businessmen, tourists, half-asleep travelers who didn't know they were walking into a storm. Then came the 2 men he'd been waiting for, Connor Lane and Blake Harlan, laughing as they stepped into the jet bridge. The smell of alcohol trailed behind them. Marcus stepped forward. "Gentlemen," they stopped, blinking at the sight of him, 6'4", broad shoulders, eyes that could freeze air. "Who the hell are you?" Connor said. Marcus didn't answer. "Which one of you threw the drink?" Blake smirked. "What? Are you her lawyer?" "No," Marcus said. "I'm her husband." The words landed like thunder. For a heartbeat, everything went silent. The hum of the terminal, the chatter of passengers, even the footsteps of the crew. Connor's grin faltered. "Look, man, It was Marcus didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. Save it. He turned to Elliot. Escort them out. Quietly. Security moved fast. Connor started to protest, but the look on Marcus's face cut his words in half. Blake mumbled something about calling his father. Nobody listened. The next person off the plane was Naomi. She walked slowly, posture straight, clothes damp but eyes sharp. When she saw Marcus, she froze. "Marcus, don't," she said softly. He took a step closer. "Are you all right? I'm fine." "You're not," she sighed. The kind of sigh that carried years of disappointment, not just in others, but in how the world never seemed to learn. "Please, let it go." He reached for her hand, but she pulled away. Her fingers trembled slightly. "Don't make this worse," she whispered. Marcus looked past her, at Lydia Price emerging behind. The woman's face was pale, exhausted. "You're the lead attendant?" he asked. Lydia hesitated. "Yes, sir." "Did you see what happened?" I did. But it all happened so fast." Marcus's jaw tightened. "And what did you do about it?" "I tried to de-escalate. I didn't want to cause a panic in the cabin." "You didn't want to cause a scene," he said quietly. "So you let them humiliate her." Lydia's mouth opened, then closed again. Her eyes dropped to the floor. Marcus turned to the airline's CEO, who had been standing awkwardly nearby, sweating through his collar. "You just witnessed your employees failing to protect a passenger, a doctor, my wife, Mr. Holt. I assure you." "Don't assure me," Marcus said. His voice stayed calm, but his words were ice. "Sell me your problem instead, because as of now, I'm about to own it." The CEO blinked. "Excuse me." Marcus took out his phone. "Dialing a number. This is Holt. Move on the acquisition now. All of it." He paused, then looked directly at the CEO. "By the time the press wakes up, I want controlling interest in North Star Air." Naomi's eyes widened. "Marcus, stop." But he was already walking toward the glass windows overlooking the runway. His reflection stared back calm, composed, dangerous. He turned back to the CEO. "Effective immediately," he said. "This crew is relieved of duty." Lydia gasped. "Sir, please, I have." Marcus raised a hand. "You should have thought of that before you chose silence." Naomi stepped between them. "Marcus," she said, voice trembling, "this isn't justice. It's revenge." He met her gaze, unflinching. Sometimes they're the same thing. For a long second, neither spoke. The hum of the terminal filled the space between them, heavy and electric. Then Naomi turned away, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "You don't understand," she whispered. "You're about to burn the whole sky." Marcus looked at her, then at the stunned faces around him. "Then let it burn," he said. "At least they'll remember the smoke." He reached out again, but she was already walking toward the exit, head high, every step measured. Behind them, Lydia stood frozen, the reality settling in. She'd lost her job, her insurance, her safety, all in the span of 5 minutes. Naomi didn't look back. Marcus did. For one brief moment, he almost regretted it. Almost outside. The night air smelled of jet fuel and rain. He followed Naomi into the darkness, his voice low. "I told you I'd protect you." She didn't answer. She just kept walking. Above them, another plane roared into the sky, its lights cutting through the clouds like a warning flare. Somewhere inside that sound was a truth neither of them wanted to face. That sometimes the way you love someone can destroy everything else you touch. The next morning, the city woke up to chaos. Screens in every coffee shop blazed with the same headline: Billionaire Marcus Holt fires entire flight crew after racist attack on wife. The story had exploded overnight. Naomi's name was everywhere, her picture leaving the terminal. Marcus's cold face beside her. The internet called it poetic justice. Hashtags sprouted like weeds. Holt justice. Stand with Naomi. Everyone loved the story of a powerful man punishing racism with corporate thunder. But inside their glass penthouse above Manhattan, silence pressed down like fog. Naomi stood by the window, watching the river move sluggishly beneath a pale sky. She still smelled the faint sweetness of coke in her hair, even after 3 washes. Her phone kept buzzing with messages of solidarity, friends, colleagues, strangers, but none of it felt like comfort. Marcus walked in, dressed in a charcoal suit, already on his phone. His voice was clipped, efficient. Move the press statement up to 9. Make sure they understand it wasn't about revenge. It was accountability. Naomi turned. Accountability, she said softly. You bought an airline overnight? He glanced at her, jaw tight. I corrected an injustice. You were assaulted. They ignored it. I acted. You acted like a god, she said. And gods don't build justice. They build fear. Marcus slipped his phone into his pocket. For the first time, he looked tired. You think I don't know what this looks like? You think I haven't spent my whole life being told to wait for fairness while the world walks over people like us? I wasn't going to wait this time. Naomi sighed. Maybe. But you didn't just punish the guilty. Marcus, you erased everyone who stood near them. He looked away. Out the window. The city stretched beneath him, his empire, his reflection. Sometimes, collateral damage is the only language power understands. Naomi walked closer, her voice quiet but steady. Then maybe we're not speaking the language of justice anymore. Down on the street, camera crews gathered outside their building. Reporters shouted questions Naomi could almost hear through the glass. Dr. Carter, how does it feel to finally see justice? Do you support your husband's decision? She didn't answer any of them. She couldn't. That afternoon, Marcus's publicist released a statement. Mr. Holt acted out of love and moral conviction after a racially motivated incident against his wife. Northstar Air has agreed to new equity leadership under Holt Industries, ensuring a zero-tolerance policy for discrimination. The internet roared with applause. Marcus became a hero overnight, the billionaire who used power for good. Late-night hosts praised him. Talk shows dissected his actions as modern chivalry, a columnist wrote. Marcus Holt did what America refuses to do, hold racism accountable. Naomi read it all. Each word felt heavier than the last. Because behind the headlines, she saw the faces that weren't in the photos, the pilots, the attendants, even Lydia Price. She remembered the look in Lydia's eyes when Marcus said, "You should have thought of that before you chose silence." It haunted her. At dinner that night, Naomi barely touched her food. Marcus talked to his team through Bluetooth earpieces between bites of salmon. "We'll rename the airline division," he said. "Rebrand it around dignity and inclusion. Maybe use Naomi's name for the initiative." "Don't use my name," she said. Marcus paused. Confused. "Why not?" "Because this isn't inclusion," Naomi said. "It's domination with better PR." His fork stopped halfway to his mouth. "You think I'm doing this for attention? I think you can't tell the difference anymore." Their eyes met across the table, and for a long moment, neither spoke. The hum of the city below filled the silence, sharp and distant. The next morning, Naomi went to her office at Neuropulse. Her staff greeted her with awkward smiles, unsure whether to congratulate or pity her. In the hallway, one of her engineers whispered, "That's the woman who brought down an airline." Naomi pretended not to hear, but inside, the words cut deeper than she expected. By noon, reporters had camped outside the company entrance. Her assistant slipped her a note. Media requests CNN, Forbes, BBC. Naomi closed her laptop. Tell them no. At the same time, Marcus was in his downtown boardroom surrounded by lawyers, shareholders, and nervous executives from North Star. Papers covered the table: acquisition contracts, termination agreements, PR drafts. One executive finally spoke. "Mr. Holt, with all due respect, firing an entire flight crew without due process could be a liability nightmare." Marcus leaned forward, eyes like steel. "The liability," he said, "was allowing bigotry on a plane with my wife. We're not debating this." The man swallowed. "Yes, sir." Outside, the city pulsed with excitement. Protesters cheered for Marcus. Hashtags trended higher. But behind every cheer was a murmur of uneasy whispers from employees wondering if power like his could turn on anyone. That night, Naomi sat alone on the balcony. The air was cool, the city humming below. She scrolled through her phone, reading messages from strangers who said she was inspirational, that she had the husband every woman deserves. Yet all she could think about was the blank stare of the flight attendant wiping at her sleeve with paper napkins. The apartment door opened behind her. Marcus stepped out, holding 2 mugs of tea. He handed her one. "You haven't spoken to me all day." "I don't know what to say," she whispered. He leaned on the railing beside her. "You could say thank you." She turned to him, startled. "Thank you. For what?" "For making me the face of vengeance." "I made you the face of justice," he said quietly. "No," she replied, her voice shaking. "You made me the excuse for your rage." The words hit him harder than he expected. His mouth opened, then closed. He looked down at the street below, the crowd still holding signs with his name. Do you know what it's like to watch someone you love be humiliated and not be able to stop it? "Yes," she said, "every day, in smaller ways, by people who smile while doing it. But Marcus, this isn't stopping it. This is becoming it." The wind tugged at her hair, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. Inside, the TV droned with news coverage. A pundit was saying, "Holt's move sets a precedent for corporate accountability in the age of social media. He's shown that power can serve justice." Naomi turned off the TV. "They're turning this into a fairy tale," she said, "and fairy tales always need villains." Marcus looked at her. "We're not the villains." "Not yet," she said. A few days later, the praise reached its peak. Marcus was invited to keynote a diversity summit. Naomi declined the invitation to join him. Cameras followed him everywhere. His face was on magazine covers, his quotes printed beside bold headlines about equality and courage. But as the applause grew louder, the shadows began to lengthen. The first crack appeared in the form of a quiet online post, a comment from someone claiming to be a fired flight attendant. "He didn't ask what happened. He didn't listen. He just destroyed us." At first, no one paid attention, but by evening, the post had been shared thousands of times. Journalists started digging, names surfaced, stories emerged about mortgages, children, medical insurance, ruined careers. Naomi read them all, heart heavy, as if each word peeled back another layer of illusion. She saw Lydia's name mentioned again and again. When Marcus came home that night, he found Naomi sitting on the couch, eyes fixed on her laptop screen. "Marcus," she said quietly, Someone's going to tell the other side. He frowned. Whose side they were complicit? They were human, she said. And humans make mistakes. But you, she looked up at him. You made a spectacle. Marcus rubbed his temple. You sound like the press. No, Naomi said. I sound like the woman who has to live with your version of justice. Outside. Lightning flickered over the skyline. The storm that had begun on the tarmac was finally reaching their home. For the first time, Marcus didn't respond. He just looked at her. His reflection caught in the glass behind her, a man both triumphant and utterly lost. And Naomi, in that silence, realized the truth sometimes the most dangerous thing isn't hate itself, but what love can justify in its name. By the end of the week, Marcus Holt had become something larger than himself. To the world, he was no longer a man, he was a movement. Talk shows replayed clips of him walking out of the terminal in that black suit, his hand resting protectively on Naomi's back. Someone had slowed the footage, added music, and uploaded it under the title, The Husband Who Stood Up. Within 24 hours, it hit 5 million views. Everywhere Naomi went. People looked at her like she was a symbol, not a woman who'd been humiliated on a flight, but the queen beside the conquering king. Taxi drivers congratulated her. Strangers sent flowers to her office. Even her patients' families, who once spoke to her in quiet tones of gratitude, now stared at her with something like awe. But Naomi didn't feel like royalty. She felt hollow. One morning, she stood in front of her mirror, brushing her hair, watching the news play in the background. The anchor smiled brightly. Billionaire Marcus Holt continues to receive global praise for his decisive stand against racism. Sources confirm he's launching a new foundation to promote equality in corporate leadership. Naomi turned off the TV. Her reflection stared back. Tired eyes, steady hands. Equality, she murmured, or control dressed as compassion. Downstairs. Marcus was already on a conference call. His voice filled the penthouse like a steady drumbeat orders. Deals, strategy. Naomi listened as she poured coffee. Yes, we'll push the initiative globally. No, it's not just PR, it's reform. We're setting a precedent. He ended the call, looking satisfied. It's working, he said to her. For once, the internet is on our side. Naomi handed him a cup. You really think the internet is anyone's side? Marcus smiled faintly. You're still upset. Upset, she said, setting down her cup. No, I'm terrified. Because you think what you did was justice. But what happens when people start asking how far that justice goes? He didn't answer. That evening, they attended a gala meant to celebrate philanthropy in tech. As soon as they entered the ballroom, heads turned. The applause began before they even reached the first table. Marcus shook hands. Naomi smiled politely, but inside she felt like a statue being paraded through a museum. A woman in a sequined dress approached her. Dr. Carter, your husband is a hero. What he did was revolutionary. Naomi nodded. Maybe, she said softly, but revolutions always leave someone bleeding. The woman laughed awkwardly, not knowing what to say. Naomi excused herself and stepped onto the balcony, away from the noise. The city stretched before her, bright, indifferent, endless. She remembered the boyish smirk on Connor's face, the brittle fear in Lydia's eyes, the way Marcus's voice had sounded when he said then, let it burn. That sentence replayed in her mind like a curse. She closed her eyes. The air smelled like champagne and rain. Somewhere inside the ballroom, Marcus was laughing, surrounded by admirers. He looked at home in the light. She had never felt further from him. Days later, the world was still applauding. Marcus was interviewed by a major network, sitting under studio lights. He looked calm, deliberate, charismatic. "I didn't act as a businessman," he said. "I acted as a husband and a human being. When my wife was disrespected, I couldn't stand by. Too often, people in power look away. I chose not to." The interviewer smiled. "You're being called a modern-day crusader against injustice." "How do you feel about that?" Marcus chuckled modestly. "If I can use my platform to make one person think twice before tolerating hate, then it's worth it." The audience clapped. Social media erupted again. Quotes from the interview flooded timelines. "Don't tolerate hate. Silence is complicity. Be the change." But as Marcus basked in admiration, Naomi scrolled through her messages in silence. Among thousands of congratulations was a single email that made her stop. The subject line read, "Please hear our side." The sender's name was Lydia Price. Naomi's hands froze above the keyboard. The message was short. "I know what I did was wrong. I panicked, but I've lost everything. I just need to talk to you, not for money, not for pity, just for understanding." Naomi closed her laptop. Her heartbeat was steady, her thoughts not. That night, she sat on the edge of their bed, watching Marcus undress. "Someone from the flight emailed me," she said. He didn't look up. "Who, Lydia Price?" Marcus's shoulders tensed. "Delete it. She says she wants to talk. She wants sympathy," he said. "She wants to clean her image. Maybe she wants forgiveness." He turned then, eyes sharp. "For what she allowed, for what she almost cost you." Naomi met his gaze. "Maybe for what we cost her." He exhaled, frustrated. "Naomi, she's not the victim here." "No," Naomi said quietly. "Neither are we anymore." He didn't reply. He just grabbed his phone and walked out to the balcony, the city lights reflecting off the glass door as it closed behind him. Alone. Naomi lay back against the pillows, staring at the ceiling. For the first time since the flight, she cried. Not because of what those men had done to her, but because she finally understood what Marcus had done in her name. Across the city, in a small apartment in Queens, Lydia Price sat at her kitchen table, phone beside a stack of overdue bills. Her granddaughter coughed softly from the next room. Lydia pressed a hand to her face, whispering, "I'm sorry," to no one in particular. Outside, snow began to fall over the rooftops. The world adored Marcus Holt's justice, but it had forgotten the people buried beneath it. The following morning, Naomi woke to the sound of her daughter, Ella, humming in the kitchen. The girl was 13, curious, bright, unfiltered. She had her mother's calm eyes and her father's boldness. "Mom," Ella said between bites of cereal. "Everyone at school's talking about Dad. They say he's like a superhero." Naomi smiled faintly. "What do you think?" Ella shrugged. "I think superheroes are supposed to fix things without breaking other stuff." Naomi froze, spoon halfway to her mouth. "That's very wise," she said. "Yeah," Ella said with a grin. "I read it on TikTok." Naomi laughed, but the sound caught in her throat. Out of the mouths of children, she thought. Later that day, while Marcus attended another interview, Naomi sat at her desk and reread Lydia's message. Her finger hovered over reply. For a long time, she didn't move. Then quietly, she typed 3 words. "I'm listening." When the cursor blinked like a heartbeat, she hit send. That night, she didn't tell Marcus. She just watched him pace the living room, talking strategy with his advisors. Every word sounded like victory, but Naomi had begun to sense that their triumph was a fragile thing, beautiful. Yes, but hollow, like glass ready to shatter. When he finally hung up, Marcus came to her side. "The board wants us to announce a public initiative in your name," he said. "Something symbolic. Maybe scholarships for women of color in aviation." Naomi looked at him carefully. "And what will that change for Lydia?" He blinked. "Who?" She shook her head slowly. "Never mind." He leaned in, kissing her temple. "This is all for you, Naomi. Everything I'm doing." As he walked away, she whispered to herself, "Then maybe that's the problem." Outside, the snow had turned to rain. The city lights bled into the streets, colors blurred by water and distance, and somewhere, between admiration and guilt, between power and pain, Naomi realized that justice without empathy was just another kind of violence, one that smiled for the cameras. The applause still echoed, but beneath it, a quieter story was beginning to form, one that no one yet wanted to hear. Aaron Walsh had seen outrage stories come and go, each one burning bright and fast, before vanishing into the next scandal. But something about the Holt incident, as the media had named it, felt unfinished. Too clean, too cinematic. Real life never tied its endings so neatly. Aaron was 31, a journalist who freelanced between moral conviction and overdue rent. Her tiny Brooklyn apartment was stacked with coffee mugs and half-read notes. The night she decided to investigate, the city was loud, alive, and indifferent. She sat at her desk, rereading Lydia Price's email that had leaked through a private message board. We lost everything. Not because we hated anyone, but because one moment erased 28 years. There was no bitterness in Lydia's words, just fatigue. That was what hooked Aaron. Rage was easy to sell. Weariness was the truth no one wanted to print. By the next morning, she was on the subway to Queens. The neighborhood was quiet, the kind where paint peeled from old brick and kids played basketball under streetlights that hummed. Lydia's apartment was on the third floor of a tired building with a flickering hallway bulb. When Lydia opened the door, Aaron saw a woman carrying the weight of grief in her posture. She looked smaller than her public photo gray sweater. Careful eyes, the kind of politeness that came from years of customer service smiles. "You must be Ms. Walsh," Lydia said softly. "Come in." The apartment smelled of lemon cleaner and stale air. A child's laughter floated from another room. Lydia glanced that way and smiled faintly. "My granddaughter. Mia. She's 8. Heart condition. I've been taking care of her since her mother passed." Aaron hesitated. "I didn't mean to intrude." "You didn't," Lydia interrupted gently. "No one else has come." They sat at a worn kitchen table, a half-finished puzzle between them. Lydia's hands trembled slightly as she poured tea. Aaron clicked her recorder on. "Can you tell me what happened that day?" Lydia took a long breath. "I saw it. The drink. The smirk. I knew it wasn't an accident." She looked down, ashamed. "But I also knew what would happen if I called it what it was. We've been trained to calm, to appease, to avoid escalation at all costs. When you're older, when you're not the face the company wants to show, you play it safe to keep your job." Her voice cracked. "I chose my paycheck over my conscience, and I lost both." Aaron said nothing. Silence did more than questions. Lydia continued, "The night I got fired, I told Mia we'd be okay. But the truth is," she glanced at the closed bedroom door, "I don't know how to pay for her next surgery. Insurance ended with the job. I've sent resumes everywhere. No one will touch me. They see my name. They Google it. And I'm the woman who let racism happen. Erin's throat tightened. Did anyone from the Holts reach out? Lydia shook her head. No. But I don't blame her. Dr. Carter Naomi, she was humiliated. I understand. What I don't understand is why her husband needed to ruin everyone to prove he cared. Outside, a siren wailed faintly, then faded into quiet. Erin turned off her recorder. Lydia, if I write this, it won't be a pity piece. It'll be the other side of a story people think they already know. Lydia looked at her, eyes tired but grateful. Just make sure they see me as human. That's all. Erin promised she would. That night, Erin sat in a diner with her laptop open, typing as the rain tapped on the window. Her article began differently than most. Every hero leaves a shadow. In the story of Marcus Holt's triumph, that shadow is shaped like a woman named Lydia Price. The words came easily, but she felt the weight of each one. She wrote about the power imbalance, about public hunger for spectacle, about how outrage had become entertainment. Justice without proportion isn't justice. It's theater, she typed. When the article published 2 days later, it detonated quietly, like a truth too uncomfortable to cheer for. At first, it sat unnoticed under the noise of trending hashtags. But by midnight, it had begun to spread. People shared screenshots of Lydia's face soft, lined, weary. Someone commented, "She looks like my mother." Another wrote, "I loved Marcus Holt, but now I'm not sure who the villain is." By morning, Lydia Price was trending beside Torts Holt Justice. Naomi saw it first. She was in her office when her assistant rushed in, holding a tablet. "You need to see this." The headline read, "The Real Cost of Holt's Justice. A Crew Left Behind." Naomi clicked play on the accompanying video. Lydia's voice filled the room. Calm, measured, devastating. "I don't hate them," Lydia said. "I just wish they'd seen me. Really seen me. The way I was supposed to see her." Naomi's hand covered her mouth. For the first time since the flight, tears came without warning. That evening, she waited for Marcus to come home. He walked in later than usual, phone pressed to his ear, face stormy. "We're handling it." He was saying, "It's a smear piece. We'll issue a statement." Naomi's voice was soft but firm. "Don't?" He paused. "Don't what? Don't fight it? Just listen." Marcus hung up, frustration in his shoulders. "She's turning people against us. She's telling the truth," Naomi said. "And that's what we should have done from the start." He stared at her, disbelief flickering across his face. "You're defending her. I'm acknowledging her," Naomi said. "There's a difference." Marcus's voice rose. "She watched them throw coke on you and did nothing. She humiliated you, and you humiliated her back," Naomi said. "Tell me, Marcus, do we feel better now for a long moment?" He said nothing. Then he turned away, pacing to the window. "You don't understand what it's like to watch the woman you love be reduced to a headline." Naomi's eyes filled, but her voice stayed steady. "I do. I'm living it." He turned, startled. "You made me into a symbol," she continued, "not a person. You used my pain as proof of your power, and now everyone's cheering for a story that never belonged to them." Outside, flashbulbs flickered through the curtains, reporters waiting for comment. Marcus sank onto the couch, running a hand over his face. "So what do you want me to do? Apologize. Admit I overreacted and watch them tear me apart." Naomi sat across from him. Maybe that's the point. Maybe we stop trying to win and start trying to be decent. Her phone buzzed with another notification. The journalist, Aaron Walsh, had sent a message requesting comment. Naomi typed back, "I'll speak. Off the record first." When she looked up, Marcus was watching her, a mix of fear and pride in his eyes. "You're going to talk to her?" "Yes," Naomi said. "Someone has to tell the truth before the truth becomes something we can't recognize." That night, after Marcus went to bed, Naomi stood on the balcony with her laptop. She opened Aaron's article again and reread the final line. "Real justice begins not with power, but with the courage to see the people we've hurt." The wind tugged at her hair. Below, the city pulsed with lights and noise. Somewhere out there, a woman named Lydia was probably putting her granddaughter to bed, hoping the world might finally understand that silence and complicity were not the same. Naomi whispered into the night, "I see you now. Inside." Marcus stirred in his sleep, unaware that the story he thought he controlled was already slipping out of his hands, transformed by a journalist's pen and a woman's quiet reckoning. For the first time in weeks, the Holt penthouse felt quiet, not peaceful, just empty. Reporters still crowded the street below, their cameras pointed toward the building like weapons. But inside, the silence was thick enough to hear the ticking of the kitchen clock. Naomi stood by the window, holding a cup of tea gone cold. The city looked different now, less like a skyline, more like a battlefield. Her reflection in the glass was pale, distant, almost like a stranger's. Marcus was pacing again, phone pressed to his ear, voice tight with exhaustion. "No, I'm not issuing another statement. We said everything that needs to be said. This article will fade in a week." He paused, jaw tightening. "I don't care about sympathy. I care about control." He hung up, tossed the phone onto the counter, and rubbed his forehead. "The board's getting nervous," he said. "They think I should take a step back until this dies down." Naomi turned, calm but steady. "Maybe you should." His eyes flashed. "You think hiding is leadership? I think silence can be strength," she said. "But you only understand volume." Marcus exhaled, pacing again. "You're talking like them now, the journalists, the critics, the people who don't know what it takes to build anything." "I'm talking like your wife," Naomi said. "The one you say you did all this for." He looked at her then, really looked, and for the first time since the flight, she saw the crack in his armor. The fury had drained, leaving something quieter, more fragile. "I did it because I couldn't stand to see you humiliated," he said. "I've watched people diminish you your entire career. Men who smiled to your face and called you aggressive when you spoke up. I wasn't going to let it happen again." Naomi's voice softened. "I know, but in saving me, you became the thing you hate, the man who uses power to silence others." He turned away, staring out the window. "I was trying to protect you. Then maybe next time. Listen to me first," she said. They stood there for a long moment, the city buzzing faintly beneath them. The silence between them wasn't angry anymore. It was tired. The kind that comes when two people realize they've been fighting on the same side, but in different languages. The next morning, Naomi went to her office for the first time in days. The elevator ride up felt endless. When she stepped out, her assistant looked nervous. "There's a journalist waiting for you," she whispered. Aaron Walsh was sitting by the window, notebook in her lap, eyes alert but kind. She stood when Naomi entered. "Thank you for meeting me." Naomi nodded. "I thought it was time." They sat across from each other, the air heavy with unspoken truths. "I didn't come here to defend my article. Aaron said. "I came because I think people deserve the whole story from you, not just from me." Naomi studied her. "You wrote with empathy. That's rare these days." Aaron smiled faintly. "Empathy's the only thing that makes journalism worth it." For the next hour, Naomi spoke more openly than she had in months, about the humiliation on the plane, the numbness after the coke hit her face, the silence that followed, about how Marcus's love was both shield and sword, about the way the world had turned her pain into entertainment. "I didn't ask him to destroy anyone," she said quietly. "I just wanted to be seen." But what happened next wasn't justice. It was theater. Everyone clapped, and I still felt invisible. Aaron listened without interrupting, pen unmoving. "Would you tell him that I've tried?" Naomi said. "But Marcus only understands victory. He doesn't know how to lose gracefully." Aaron looked thoughtful. "Then maybe it's time you show him how." When Aaron left, Naomi sat at her desk, fingers resting on the wood. Outside, the winter sun was fading, painting the city gold. She thought about Lydia's voice in the interview, gentle, forgiving. And she realized forgiveness was power too, just not the kind Marcus knew how to use. That evening, Naomi went home to find Marcus sitting in the dark, TV muted on a news panel discussing the Holt fall. His tie was undone, eyes hollow. "They're calling me tyrannical," he said quietly. "A billionaire who weaponized morality." Naomi walked over and sat beside him. "You built this," she said softly, "and now you can decide what to do with it." He turned to her, disbelief flickering in his expression. "You still think there's a way back from this?" "There's always a way back," she said, "but it starts with owning what you broke." He gave a bitter laugh. "And what did I break?" "Exactly." She looked at him, unflinching. "Me. Them. You." The words hung in the air, heavier than any accusation. Marcus leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "You think an apology will fix it?" "No," Naomi said, "but it might make you human again." Later that night, Marcus stood alone on the balcony, the wind cutting cold against his face. Below, the city glimmered alive, indifferent, waiting for its next story. For the first time, he felt small against it. Not powerful, just one man among millions, trying to make sense of what he'd done. Inside, Naomi was on the couch, scrolling through her messages. One was from Lydia. "Tell him I forgive him. Not because he deserves it, but because I can't keep carrying it." Naomi stared at the message for a long time. Then she walked to the balcony door. "Lydia forgives you," she said quietly. Marcus didn't turn. "And what about you?" Naomi's answer came like a whisper. "I'm trying." He closed his eyes. The sound of the city below filled the silence. Over the next week, the backlash intensified. North Star's stock began to fall. Former employees spoke out on television. Activists who once hailed Marcus now called for accountability. A protest formed outside Holt Tower. Signs reading "Justice isn't vengeance," and "Power without empathy is still power." Marcus watched it all unfold from his office window. For once, he didn't call his PR team. He didn't draft a statement. He just watched, absorbing every chant, every handmade sign, every echo of his own actions mirrored back in disapproval. When Naomi arrived later that day, he looked at her differently, less like a woman to protect, more like the compass he'd lost. "You were right," he said quietly. "I wanted justice to feel good. I wanted to feel powerful for doing the right thing. But maybe the right thing shouldn't feel like winning." Naomi nodded. "Justice isn't supposed to feel good. It's supposed to feel honest." He sat back in his chair, running a hand over his face. Do you think people will ever see me as anything other than the villain now? Maybe not, she said, but they might see the man who tried to change. That night, Marcus called a press conference. The world tuned in, expecting defiance. Instead, they saw something they'd never seen from him before: humility. He stood behind the podium. No teleprompter, no notes. When I saw my wife disrespected, I wanted the world to know that silence is not an option. But in my anger, I became what I despised: a man who believed his pain gave him permission to destroy. I was wrong. Justice without compassion is cruelty in disguise. The room was silent. Cameras clicked. Marcus continued, voice steady but heavy. I can't undo what I've done, but I can take responsibility. Effective immediately. I'm stepping down as chairman of Holt Industries. I will also establish a fund to support airline workers who lose jobs due to corporate retaliation. This isn't redemption, it's accountability. He looked directly at the cameras. And to Lydia Price, wherever you are, I'm sorry. When he walked off stage, Naomi was waiting behind the curtain. He met her eyes, uncertain. Was that enough? She reached for his hand. It's a start. Outside, the city was quiet. The outrage had paused, replaced by something else: curiosity, maybe respect. For the first time in months, Marcus felt lighter, as if laying down the crown of righteousness had freed him more than victory ever did. Later that night, Naomi and Marcus sat together on the balcony, the same spot where anger once lived. Ella had gone to bed, the lights of her room faint through the window. Marcus broke the silence. Do you think people will forgive me? Naomi leaned her head on his shoulder. Maybe someday, but forgiveness isn't the point. Then what is? She looked up at the stars. Learning to live with what you've done and still choosing to be better. The wind rustled softly, carrying away the echoes of a story that had begun with humiliation and ended in humility. The city below shimmered, unbothered, moving forward as it always did. And for the first time, Marcus didn't want to control it. He just wanted to belong to it again. The world didn't know how to respond to Marcus Holt's apology. Some called it brave. Others said it was too late. News anchors replayed his speech on a loop, dissecting every word. On social media, people argued over whether redemption was real or just a performance. But for the first time since that flight, the noise didn't matter to Marcus. He had said what needed to be said. And now all that was left was silence, the uncomfortable kind that comes after confession. Naomi watched from the wings as the press conference ended. She hadn't realized she'd been holding her breath until Marcus stepped off the stage. His face looked pale under the lights, his eyes hollow but peaceful. When their gazes met, he gave her a small nod, almost as if asking permission to breathe again. She smiled softly, just enough for him to know he could. That night, the city seemed quieter than usual. The wind outside their apartment brushed against the windows like an old friend trying to make amends. Naomi sat on the couch with her laptop open, scrolling through the aftermath online. One headline caught her attention. Can a billionaire's regret heal a working woman's wound? The article was written by Aaron Walsh. Naomi clicked it open. Aaron's tone wasn't cruel. It was measured, reflective. Marcus Holt's apology will not erase Lydia Price's hardship, nor the humiliation Dr. Carter endured. But for once, accountability was not outsourced to lawyers or PR teams. It came from the man himself. And that, perhaps, is where change begins. Naomi smiled faintly. Aaron had managed to capture what so many missed: the quiet dignity of trying to do better. Not to be applauded, but to be decent. Marcus emerged from the bedroom, no longer in his tailored suits, just a gray sweatshirt and jeans. The exhaustion clung to him like dust. "They're saying the market's stabilizing," he murmured. "Apparently, contrition makes investors sentimental." Naomi closed her laptop. "And how do you feel?" He sat beside her, rubbing his temples, like I've been carrying a house on my back, and finally put it down. But now I don't know who I am without it. She looked at him with quiet affection. Maybe that's not a loss. Maybe it's space. He turned his head toward her. Space for what? For who you were, before you needed to win, she said. Her words hung in the air like smoke. Marcus didn't answer, but he reached for her hand, and for the first time in months, she didn't pull away. The next day, Naomi asked Aaron to arrange a meeting with Lydia Price. Aaron hesitated at first. "Are you sure she doesn't want pity?" "I don't either," Naomi said. "I want truth." They met in a small cafe in Queens, far from the marble towers and glass offices of Manhattan. The place smelled of coffee and cinnamon. When Lydia walked in, Naomi stood immediately. For a moment, they just looked at each other. Two women connected by a single, irreversible moment in time. Lydia was thinner than Naomi remembered, her hands trembling slightly as she took a seat. "Dr. Carter," she began, voice low. "You didn't have to come." "I did," Naomi said gently, "because no one should lose everything for a moment I wish had never happened." Lydia shook her head. "You're kind, but I was wrong too. I froze. I thought if I stayed calm, it would pass. I didn't understand that silence can be its own violence." Naomi reached across the table, resting her hand over Lydia's. We were both surviving in our own ways. They sat in silence for a while, the sounds of cups clinking and quiet chatter around them. Aaron watched from another table, not as a journalist, but as a witness to something fragile. Two people rebuilding the smallest bridge between harm and healing. Lydia spoke again, her eyes glistening. "After everything, I didn't hate you. I hated the story that replaced me. I became the villain in a narrative I didn't write." Naomi nodded slowly. "And I became the symbol in one I didn't choose." When they left the cafe, the afternoon sun spilled over the street, golden and forgiving. Naomi turned to Lydia. "Would you let me help? Not as charity, something fair? A fund, maybe, for airline staff who get caught in the crossfire of power?" Lydia smiled weakly. "You'd do that? It's the least I can do," Naomi said. "We can call it the Quiet Skies Initiative." Lydia laughed softly. "That's beautiful." That evening, Naomi told Marcus about the meeting. He listened, expression unreadable. When she finished, he nodded. "You did what I should have done months ago." She touched his arm. "We both had to arrive here our own way." He exhaled. "Do you think she'll ever forgive me?" "She already has," Naomi said. "Now you have to forgive yourself." Marcus went quiet, staring out the window where the lights of the city flickered like tiny apologies. A week later, they invited Aaron to their apartment for an exclusive interview, not for publicity, but to close the story on their own terms. Aaron set her recorder on the table. "What changed?" she asked Marcus. He thought for a moment before answering. "I stopped mistaking noise for justice. I thought power could fix everything, but power without humility only multiplies the pain." Aaron looked at Naomi. "And you," Naomi smiled softly. "I learned that healing isn't a headline. It's a choice you make quietly, over and over again." Aaron nodded. understanding. What do you want people to remember from all this? Marcus looked into the camera for the first time since his apology. That decency isn't weakness. It's courage that doesn't need an audience. The interview aired a few days later, without sensational editing or dramatic music, just truth. Viewers watched in silence, and something unusual happened. People didn't argue. They reflected. Meanwhile, the Quiet Skies Initiative launched quietly online. Lydia became one of its first advisors. The fund provided legal and mental health support for aviation workers affected by discrimination or workplace trauma. Within weeks, it raised millions, not because Marcus demanded attention, but because Naomi asked for understanding. One evening, Marcus visited the program's first support center in Queens. The building was modest, tucked between a laundromat and a grocery store. Lydia greeted him at the door. "I didn't think you'd actually come," she said, half smiling. "I needed to," he said, "to see what doing the right thing looks like when it's not about me." They walked through the small office, past volunteers sorting supplies, past a bulletin board covered in thank you notes from families. Marcus stopped in front of a photograph pinned to the wall, a picture of a clear sky, taken from a plane window. Underneath it was a handwritten note. "Justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers." He stood there for a long moment. When he turned back to Lydia, his eyes were damp. "You helped me remember who I wanted to be." Lydia smiled faintly. Maybe that's what we're all doing, helping each other remember. That night, Marcus returned home to find Naomi sitting on the balcony, a book in her lap. The city hummed softly beneath them, alive but gentle. He joined her, taking a deep breath of the cool air. "Do you think we'll ever stop being the story?" he asked. Naomi closed her book and looked at him. "Stories end when we stop repeating them. We've said enough. Now we live." He nodded, reaching for her hand. The sound of distant traffic mixed with the soft hum of the wind. For the first time since the flight, the silence between them felt like peace, not punishment. Below, the lights of New York shimmered like a living heartbeat. Somewhere in the city, Lydia tucked her granddaughter into bed. Erin drafted her next article about quiet forms of bravery, and the world, for once, kept spinning without outrage. Justice had begun as a storm, but it ended here softly, in the steady rhythm of forgiveness. Months passed, and winter gave way to spring. The scandal that had once dominated headlines was now just another archived story in the endless stream of human outrage. But for Naomi Carter and Marcus Holt, the echoes never fully faded. They lived quieter lives now by choice, not exile. The Holt penthouse, once filled with late-night conference calls and the ceaseless buzz of ambition, had grown still. Marcus's desk sat empty most days. The framed certificates and corporate awards now boxed and stored in the hallway closet. What remained was the sound of coffee brewing, the soft murmur of morning news, and the laughter of Ella, their daughter, who had begun asking questions far too grown for her age. "Mom," she said one morning over breakfast, "why do people on the internet still talk about what happened on the plane?" Naomi set down her cup. "Because some stories take longer to understand," she said gently. Ella tilted her head. "But you and Dad said sorry. Isn't that enough?" Naomi smiled sadly. "Sometimes sorry is a seed, not a finish line. It takes time to grow." Ella seemed to think about that for a moment, then nodded solemnly. "I think it's growing." Marcus entered then, his hair still damp from a run, face calm in a way Naomi hadn't seen in years. "What's growing?" he asked. Ella grinned. "You're sorry." He laughed softly, leaning down to kiss her forehead. Let's hope it's a strong tree, then. There was something disarming about how easily life had shifted from empire to ordinary. Marcus had stepped down from his board positions completely, choosing instead to teach part-time at a local university. His lectures on business ethics were surprisingly popular, not because of his fame, but because he spoke like a man who had lived through the very lessons he now taught. He didn't speak of the flight directly, but his students knew. Power, he told them once, pacing in front of the whiteboard, is not measured by how loud you can speak, but by how willing you are to listen. Every decision carries weight, and when you forget the people beneath the numbers, you stop being a leader, you become an executioner. After class, a student approached him, a young woman with nervous eyes. "Mr. Holt," she said, "I wanted to thank you. My dad's a mechanic. When he lost his job during the pandemic, no one cared. But when I read about the Quiet Skies Initiative, it made me feel like people like us mattered again." Marcus nodded, humbled. "That means more to me than you know," he said quietly. The Quiet Skies Initiative had grown far beyond what Naomi imagined. With Lydia Price as director and Aaron Walsh on the advisory board, it expanded into a nationwide advocacy program for airline and hospitality workers. They held workshops on recognizing racial bias, offered free legal aid for unjust terminations, and, perhaps most importantly, created a community where compassion was policy, not an afterthought. Naomi often visited the Queen's office on weekends. It had become a haven of stories, some painful, others hopeful. One afternoon, as she walked through the hall lined with photographs of volunteers, Lydia approached her with a small envelope. "This came for you," she said. Inside was a handwritten note from one of the young men, Connor Lane, the passenger who had thrown the Coke months ago. His handwriting was hesitant, almost apologetic. "Dr. Carter, I don't expect forgiveness, but I needed to tell you that what I did changed me. I'm volunteering now with youth programs about accountability. I see now that privilege is a wall I built without realizing who it kept out. I'm sorry." Naomi folded the note, her chest tightening. "Do you believe he means it?" she asked quietly. Lydia smiled faintly. "Does it matter? The important thing is that he's trying." That night, Naomi showed the letter to Marcus. He read it silently, eyes scanning slowly, then handed it back. "Would you ever meet him?" "Maybe someday," Naomi said, "when I'm ready to see him as a person, not a memory." Marcus nodded. "Then I hope that day comes for both of you." It was strange, Naomi thought, how healing never arrived like a grand revelation. It came quietly in late-night conversations, in the absence of anger, in the sound of someone saying, "Thank you," instead of, "I'm right." Weeks later, Aaron Walsh visited their home to film a short documentary on restorative justice. The camera crew was small, the lighting soft, the questions thoughtful. "What have you learned from all this?" Aaron asked Naomi during the interview. Naomi thought for a long moment before answering. "That dignity can survive humiliation," she said finally. "That anger can build walls or bridges. It depends on what you do with it. And that forgiveness isn't a gift you give someone else. It's the only way you keep yourself from drowning." Aaron turned to Marcus. "And you?" He smiled slightly, hands folded in his lap. "That love can't justify destruction. I thought defending Naomi meant punishing everyone who hurt her. But I've learned that love's real power isn't protection, it's restraint." Aaron lowered her camera slightly. "You know, people will study this story for years. The racial dynamics, the class tension, the moral paradoxes. Do you ever worry you'll always be remembered for the worst thing you did? Marcus looked at Naomi before answering. If that's what it takes for people to learn something better, then I can live with that. When the interview ended, Erin hugged them both. Thank you for letting me finish the story right, she said, after they left. Naomi stood by the balcony again, watching the city pulse beneath her. She thought of all the moments that had led here, the cold sting of coke on her face, the rage in Marcus's eyes, the hollow victory that followed, and the long, humbling climb toward peace. Every step had been necessary, even the painful ones. Marcus joined her, holding 2 mugs of tea. Do you think people change? He asked. I think they learn to see, she said. Change is just what happens after. They stood in silence, sipping their tea as the night stretched wide and forgiving. A soft breeze drifted through the open window, carrying the faint sounds of laughter from the street below. Somewhere out there, lives were continuing, some still broken, some healing, all trying, and maybe that was the point. Weeks later, the Quiet Skies Initiative held its first annual dinner. The hall was modest but warm, filled with workers, volunteers, and families who'd found new beginnings. Lydia stood on stage to deliver her speech. This organization began from pain, she said, her voice trembling slightly. But it lives because of grace. We're not here to erase the past. We're here to make sure the next time someone's dignity is tested, they won't stand alone. As the audience applauded, Lydia spotted Naomi and Marcus in the front row, holding hands. She smiled. The story that once destroyed them had become the foundation of something lasting. After the event, Naomi stepped outside to the quiet street, the city lights shimmering above. Lydia joined her. You know, she said, it's funny. I used to think justice was about fairness. Now I think it's about courage. The courage to stay human when everything in you wants to be right. Naomi looked up at the night sky, clear and endless. Maybe that's what the quiet sky means, she said softly. A place where noise finally rests. Marcus walked up behind them, slipping his arm around Naomi's shoulders. Let's go home, he murmured. As they walked away, Erin watched from across the street, her camera lowered. She didn't record. Some endings, she thought, were too sacred to capture. The story would live on, not as a scandal, but as a parable, a modern fable about race, power, love, and the cost of losing sight of humanity. In the end, no one threw coke again. But the memory of that cold, humiliating splash became a mirror, one that forced everyone who saw it to ask if I had that kind of power. What would I do with it? And somewhere in that question lay the quiet truth of redemption. The story of Naomi Carter and Marcus Holt reminds us that justice is not always about punishment sometimes. It's about perspective. True justice isn't measured by how many people we silence, but by how much humanity we preserve in the process. When Marcus acted out of love, he believed he was protecting his wife, but his anger turned compassion into destruction. In life, we often face moments where our pain demands reaction, but wisdom lies in restraint, in listening before judging, in choosing empathy over ego. The world doesn't need more heroes who win battles. It needs more people who understand that grace can be stronger than vengeance. As we grow older, we learn that dignity doesn't come from victory, but from how we carry our scars. The greatest power any of us can hold is not control, it's forgiveness. Thank you for watching and staying until the end. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us bring more stories that inspire reflection, compassion, and hope. See you in the next story, and remember, Justice means nothing without humanity.